Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Houston Chronicle Live, a virtual event series where readers are invited to join us live for on-the-record interviews with fascinating guests on relevant issues. And today's guest, TA Commissioner Mike Morath, is particularly fascinating and relevant. So thank you for joining us. It is now 12:03. Usually we give everyone a few minutes to join the Zoom, but hopefully you've had a chance to do so. This is a fun little HC Live tradition we have where we want everyone to comment in the chat where you are tuning in from across the Houston region. If you're at work in downtown Houston, if you're at home in Sugar Land, if you're stuck in traffic on I-45, we want to know. So if you can drop that in the chat, we'd love to see where you are tuning in from. I see some things already. Lisa, someone's tuning in from Seguin.
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 Get it right, Jennifer.
Seguin,
It's not a sequin. It's not Seguin.
I'm glad you had a chance to see how terribly I pronounced your hometown. And so while everyone is getting a chance to tell us where you are tuning in from across Houston and Texas, I'm going to go ahead and read a short bio from our panelists. Mike Morath took office as Commissioner of Education and was unanimously confirmed by the Texas Senate in March 2017. As commissioner, he heads the TEA, which oversees pre-K through high school education for more than 5.5 million students enrolled in both traditional independent school districts and public charter schools. He previously served on the Dallas ISD Board of Trustees for more than 4 years, went to Garland High School, and went on to earn a business degree from George Washington University. He and his wife, Dr. Laura Vondra, have 4 children. And of course, we have Lisa Falkenberg. She is our statewide senior columnist, focusing on commentary rooted in Texas. She won the paper's first Pulitzer in 2015, and as editorial page editor has led the editorial board to 2 more Pulitzers, once in 2022 for editorials debunking the voter fraud myth, and earlier this year in 2025 for a series on officials' failure to protect Houstonians from stalled trains. All right, so it's now 12:05. Throughout the whole time, if you can, just as you were commenting in the chat, telling us where you're tuning in from, we will have time at the end reserved for audience Q&A. So if you have any questions for Commissioner Morath, any questions for Lisa Falkenberg, please utilize that chat feature and drop your questions in there. I will be monitoring that space. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Lisa.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. And just to be sure, can the commissioner see all the questions as well, or his staff?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so if you guys see something that you really want to address, please let us know. We don't want to miss anything that you're thinking is important that we didn't cover. Okay, so I really appreciate the commissioner being here. I appreciate everybody who cares about education tuning in today, especially the teachers who are tuning in from your lunch hour. And I just want to say before we start out, there's some big feelings in this city, in this district, about some of the changes that have happened. And so in my experience, talking with the commissioner through the years, he is always insightful, curious, well-read. He gives me homework, tells me what books to read, and anyway, it's refreshing to have somebody like that in government. I deal with a lot of people in government, and you don't always get that. He's really responsive, so it's good that he's here. Let's all be respectful and make this as constructive as possible. Commissioner, the first thing I want to ask you about, we have this takeover, and I'll try to say intervention as much as possible as I can out of respect for you. I'm wondering, these 2 years in, tell us, what did you hope to accomplish going into this? Because it really is a big experiment. A lot of things have been done before, but maybe not on this scale. And how do you think it's going?
Yes, it's a great question. The whole reason for the intervention in the first place is we have inside of Houston ISD, which is obviously a very large system with very different sets of experience for lots of different kids, lots of different employees, lots of different families. You had whole swaths of schools that, for whatever reason, the district could not organize the structures in support of those schools to give kids a decent education. And the reason that we have public schools is to serve as the great equalizer, so that everybody has a shot, everybody can try to pursue opportunity in this country. And you had places where, and it's never like a lack of hard work, but the way that the system was organized just did not work for huge numbers of kids that would come up and ultimately graduate, and in fact, fully graduate, but graduate with levels of literacy that are, equivalent to, say, a fourth grader, a third grader, and levels of mathematical skill that's, not going to be able to gain them access to really any substantive opportunity in the country. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to change change the experience for the most at-risk kids in Houston so that they were given far better structured academic opportunities, and then that their level of performance and proficiency would rise. So that was the whole purpose. And you have a very large system, so a lot of changes happened. But certainly the number of campuses that are sort of not structurally supported to give kids opportunity, the number of what you would think of as failing campus or even chronically failing campuses dropped dramatically. So the most recent year, not a single F campus, no more. We're really at a point where there's next to no more chronically underperforming campuses. I think one or two this year D campuses were previously an F or D. So we're pretty close to having accomplished that objective. And it wasn't easy for anybody to do, because anybody that works in schools knows that this work is incredibly difficult. But the curriculum changes, the instructional sort of structure changes, master schedule changes, staffing pattern changes, changes in compensation structure, changes in evaluation, changes in leadership expectations. It's been a wholesale set of changes, and the net result is that the groups of students in Houston that have historically been most left behind are starting to see significant improvements in the sort of quality of their academic experience. And we can see that in significant outcomes improvements. The kids are learning more. They're doing math at a much higher level. They're doing reading at a much higher level. They know more science. They know more history than they did 3 years ago. And that's, why do we have school in the first place? We have school to teach these things.
Mm-hmm. And so, and in making that assessment, it's based on an A through F system that I don't know if everybody, maybe myself included, completely understands. It's confusing. Somebody asked a minute ago about achievement versus growth. And it's confusing for some people that your achievement could actually be what's deemed pretty low. But your growth would allow you to get a higher rating in A, B.
Yeah.
When you're talking to regular people, how do you describe this rating system?
Well, let me actually just stay on one piece of that for Houston for a minute before we get into the rating system. What was the level of mathematics proficiency of students in Houston ISD in 2022? It was way below state average. This is students doing math at a modicum of appropriate levels, students doing math on grade levels, students mastering math. And we have this measurements from third grade through high school graduation, whether we're looking at SAT scores and how kids are doing on math there, whether we're looking at STAR scores for how they're doing in mathematics. And in 2 years, a school district that had previously had levels of mathematics achievement that was way below state average now has mathematics achievement that is way above, or is above state average. It's above it at the highest level for the highest performing students, which we think of as mastering grade level. There's more kids mastering grade level. There's more kids meeting grade level. There's more kids at the approaches grade level. There's fewer kids that it does not meet grade level. This is sort of all available sort of public information. So, talking to educators recognize we're in the growth business. Our job is to maximize human potential. And you have some kids that walk into school and they might be three grade levels behind. And so getting them to reach grade level at the end of the year is obviously a very difficult task So we evaluate growth, but the goal is to get students to higher levels of proficiency. And you see far higher levels of proficiency today in Houston than you did 2 years ago. So that's sort of one thing. So I've heard this argument that this is actually I hear sort of a lot of chatter that there's something incorrect in the outcomes, but those arguments are all false. The A through F system, though, when it looks at campuses, it looks at them holistically. So we are interested, I as a dad, I'm interested in how well my kids are performing on grade level expectations. I want to know, it's third grade, have you memorized your times tables? It's fourth grade, how are you doing on fractions? How clearly can you write a paragraph? Can you write a grammatically correct sentence? It's seventh grade. Talk to me about the novel that you've read. How are you unpacking and finding meaning from this? These are important to me. But also, each of my children have their own strengths and weaknesses. I want to know how they're growing individually as individuals. So both of these are important. They're important to parents. They're important to taxpayers. They're important to educators. And so the A through F system is a balance of those things. We have a measurement that looks at what's the proficiency rate in the school, that's achievement, and we look at what's the growth rate in the school, and that's growth. And ultimately, you want high levels of achievement everywhere. But if you're starting with a large number of students that are 3, 4, 5 years below grade level, then for sure you need to start with high levels of growth, and then over time see higher levels of achievement. And we're seeing both in Houston Public Schools.
Mm-hmm. And you're confident in the way that that test is measuring. We all know that test prep works. I took an ACT test prep. It didn't help much, but it did help. And we know that learning how to take a test, is helpful. But are you confident that it's really measuring actual skills that are sustainable, that are long lasting?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a question that many people spend a great deal of time and energy on debating in this country. Most of the time, we're real good at talking past one another as opposed to engaging with sort of the evidence base. What you're talking about is how to measure human capacity. This is the fundamental question. How do we know how well our students are growing and performing? And you've got kids, you yourself are a human being. We are complicated creatures. So measuring anything that humans do is complex. I ran the 1600 meter in high school. You time it. It's a distance run. You can also run a 100-yard dash. It's actually a different distance run. You can run a 5 mile. That's a different distance run. So these are ways of trying to evaluate it. Ways of measuring reading is actually much more complex than just measuring somebody's speed on a track. And so this has been studied for 100 years in this country in terms of how you measure reading. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. The approach that is taken with STAR is one way. It's been pretty heavily studied. So anybody can look at every individual question that is posed on the STAR test. We actually have groups of 20 classroom teachers that build the actual test questions themselves, approve the test questions, and they all have to answer questions at the end of the day about the questions, which is in my class, if kids are appropriately supported, they can answer this question correctly at the end of the year. So every question on the STAR test has to go through that process. And then it's administered. But what is different about the STAR than most of the other things that we do is a lot of long-term sort of research and development. So for example, we can discern that a student who meets grade level threshold on their English language arts sort of high school exams, we can tell that they have a 60% chance of passing freshman level college classes. We know that. It's actually the same evidence base that SAT or ACT have. So when a student performs at a certain level on the ACT, like you did, I think it's at a 24 on the ACT, you have a 75% chance of passing freshman classes. If it's a 21, you have a 60% chance of passing freshman classes. So the meets grade level and master's grade level designation on STAR are calibrated, and they have the same evidence base. So you can actually see, how did the kids do? You wait a few years, you see how they did. Then in college, you wait a few years, you can see how they did in life. Researchers have actually studied this in terms of income. And we can tell that how well the students did on their sort of ultimate assessment in school is directly correlated with how much money they're making in their 20s, ultimately even projecting forward in their 30s. Now, thankfully, these tests don't predict everything, because we would want people to change. We want their behavior to change over time and get better. I think about all the things that I've learned over the course of my life. And so, 60% chance, 75% chance, this is about as predictive as anything that we have in courses. It tends to be much more predictive than some of the other indicators that we get in public education.
Right. And just for the record, I did horribly on my tests. Nobody figured out till college that I had a processing disorder when I read, so I'd only finished half the test. So I would have been locked out of life if everybody trusted my test scores. But I think that, we're getting a new test. I'm going to get to HISD, but I just want to talk about this. We're getting some new tests, which we don't know what they are yet, beginning, middle, and end. And so some people thought that's less pressure. By the laws of physics, that's less pressure. You have more or less pressure. But some are concerned that even though we're banning test prep per se, that still working class will be all designed to ace this test, or to do very well on this test. And I don't know, I'm just concerned. I want to hear from you what your plans so far are. Who's going to do these tests, which are going to be accepted at the beginning of the year? Y'all have a say in the end of the year test. But my kids got in the car the other day. They had just taken the PSAT. I've never heard this before from teens. They were bragging, saying how wonderful the test was. They enjoyed it. They learned something in one of the passages about a musician. And they talked about different aspects of it that they actually liked. So I sometimes wonder why we have to reinvent the wheel on these tests. If the College Board does them well, if the SAT people do them well, can't we just find effective tests that kids actually don't find drudgery, and use those in Texas?
Yeah, well, so we do use the PSAT and the SAT in Texas. We use them in high school. There's a whole bunch of different assessments that are taken in high school. There's no PSAT for third graders. So it tends to be harder to find assessments. Now, the PSAT and the SAT are not inherently based on Texas standards. So the content on those tests is just decided by the people that run the College Board. So you have some questions as to who's developing tests. Have the questions been approved by Texas educators, or based on Texas content? So there's some of that but these are all reasonable debates that I think members of the legislature have pretty regularly, in terms of how they, where does the curriculum come from? Who designs the curriculum? How does it get designed? Who's designing the tests? What are the tests used for? I mean, I think there's pros and cons of a whole bunch of different approaches that one could take in how to design any of these systems.
So y'all are still y'all are still working on designing, or in your case, I guess TEA has the say in the latter part of the year, the end of the year test that's going to be rolled out. Was it 2027?
Yeah, 27, 28 school years when it's called the Student Success Tool starts.
Okay. Well, in HISD, as you know, we've got a lot of concerns, myself included. I've written about some of them in the curriculum, and I think I understand what some of the goals are. One of the books you suggested to me recently is A Knowledge Gap, and it helped me understand that we want content rich. We want to front load a lot of content, history, social studies that were being thrown by the wayside because of so much skills testing or skills building. Well, you can't read if you don't have the background knowledge that some of us give our kids, but other kids don't have those on family vacations, and
Right.
just different things they're supposed to. So I got it. But the problem in HISD, one of the problems that I've identified is that okay, but the teachers have lost the ability to read storybooks to kindergartners, first graders, second graders. They're having to sneak around to do that. And science of reading is smart. It's good. Nobody's saying we want whole language and we want osmosis, to teach kids how to read by osmosis. But I talked to one of the pioneers of the science of reading, and she says, you have to have literature. You have to have joy in addition to the explicit phonics instruction. So I know I sent you that column. I don't know if you have any response to that.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm in complete agreement with the argument that you're making that you have to have literature and reading, and you have to do that early. Like again, you've got a kindergarten. I think something like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, or the Story of Jumping Mouse, if you know that one. The if you're familiar with like one of the more classics, like the Bremen Town Musicians. These Story of Johnny Appleseed. I presume what you'd want is you'd want sort of like in a kindergarten classroom, let's sit crisscross applesauce and have story time and like engage in those stories. This is, I think, what you're arguing in favor.
And just great writing. I mean, I use Bob books for my kids, Dot, Sat on the Map, fine. I want them to have E.B. White. I want them to
Yeah,
have lyrical.
I'm not talking about phonics. I'm not talking about decoding. I'm actually just talking about sort of literature. Reading the story, hearing the story of the Princess and the Pea. These kinds of stories. You go deep on a children's a story on King Midas. Like this is what you're talking about. E.B. White's Charlotte's Web. I don't know that you cover Charlotte's Web in kindergarten, but you're going to cover it sort of in the very young ages. This is what you want to have happen. This is a question, not a statement. This is what you're arguing in favor of.
So I'm not a teacher, but I've talked to many who have spent careers, 20 years, 15 years building a classroom library that they can't touch anymore, that they can't take a volume out and read. And so you could say, oh, that's commercial, or, commercial products or something. I think I've seen that reference made. But to me, it's time tested. It's the books that you read to your kids at bedtime that I'm reading to my kids.
Yeah,
And
I think again,
the teacher should be able to choose that, in other words, in addition to the standardization that I understand has a place.
Okay, so your story that you wrote indicated that they weren't reading these books in kindergarten. Every title that I just said are books that are being read in kindergarten because they're part of the actual expectations in kindergarten in Houston ISD schools. The thing is, I think your story was inaccurate in that regard. What was accurate was you were talking to teachers that said, I want to read X. And they were in an environment where, no, you can't read X. And I think you're making the case that means there's nothing being read, but instead what is happening is they're reading Y. So this really comes down to who is choosing which stories are being read in the kindergarten classroom. It's not a question of whether stories are being read and great literature is being read. It's whether a question of, is that going to be different in every classroom in Houston, chosen individually by each classroom teacher, or is it going to be a set of common literature that you would want all of the kids in Houston to read? So I think this is fundamentally the issue at play. So I think that the characterization that they're not reading books in kindergarten in Houston is false. That's like factually inaccurate. I think that the argument, though, that individual classroom teachers wanted to read something different, but were told instead to read, the Three Billy Goats Gruff instead, I think that is true.
Okay, I would encourage you just to look at the books on the list that the superintendent called books, and some of these are teachers' manuals that are like the spiral bound that they read from, and there's not a lot of engaging language in those books. The teachers say they say decodables, the ones that the district mentioned when I ask about this, aren't the kind that inspire kids and can hold their imaginations. They look at the kids as they're consuming this, and they are falling asleep or moving around or just seeming very bored. It's different than, when you're reading something that just really captures your attention. So I would just, technically, yes, books, technically this AP style book I have is a book, right? But what books? And I would like us to listen more to teachers about what they think is inspiring, and listen to us as parents. I mean, you know what you're reading, and I don't know how many of those titles you've read to your kids. So, but the other concern is that, you know, teacher turnover. Some of this has to be standardized, in my opinion. I get that. You can't just have a mishmash of everybody teaching whatever. It's hard to measure, and you want a certain standard. But, you know, HISD has experienced a lot of teacher turnover. It's, you know, much higher than the state average. And I wonder if you see that as a, let me ask you this question, which might seem silly, but is that a benefit or a danger to academic progress? I ask that because our superintendent says that it's the teachers who need to go who are going. They have a cultural issue, or they're not very good, you know. Those are the people who are going. I would argue with that. But what do you see when you see the turnover here?
Yeah, I mean the district has experienced a high teacher turnover in the last 2 years relative to its historic average. The measurements of student learning at the same time have gone up. I can't comment on one individual teacher or another. So it strikes me that anytime you have turnover in an organization, you have to reflect on it. And is the turnover indicative of sort of a decline in performance or in quality of personnel? Is it indicative of an increase in quality of personnel? That's certainly different than any one individual employee. Because I can think about my own school and the teachers that my kids have had, and some of those teachers have been amazing, amazing human beings, and I want to retain them forever. And some of the teachers have been fairly ineffective, and so the next year a new teacher comes along, and hopefully we can see some improvement. So I think it entirely depends on the nature of the staff that are leaving.
Well, I just, again, I would ask you to look at those numbers and talk to teachers. You know, my daughter had one that left last year, and she had gotten some evaluations that troubled her. And my daughter was very sad. I said, well, where did she go? St. John's. So I think that we've got teachers going to some of the best, they're good enough for some of the best schools in the state, but they're not fitting in here. And why is that? I think when you're a teacher, you don't get paid a lot. You don't, there's a lot of reward in helping kids with their futures, but a lot of it is creativity, just being able to have some say in your approach. And reading from a script, how a lot of them describe it, is not very satisfying. But there are other things that are more objective. There are errors in the curriculum. There are, which I'm sure that you've been shown, and there are just kind of this haphazardness. I mean, I don't know how many spot evaluation forms we've had this year. Somebody can answer that, 5 or 6. But how is this supposed to be high quality and working when it seems to be really fly by the seat of your pants? 5, somebody says.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question I would have for you on that is what was happening before? Is this better? Is it the same, or is it worse? You're never going to get a situation, certainly in a district as large as Houston, where everyone agrees all the time on everything that's happening. Also, any endeavor of man, the concept that 100,000 pages of content would have not a single error in it in any place. It just strikes me as it's a difficult standard to reach. So the question is, how much better does the content get year in, year out, week in, week out? What was happening in some of the schools before? What was the content there before? What was the coverage of the content or lack of content that was there before? What were the kids reading before in kindergarten? What are they reading now? What were the lessons plans before in kindergarten? What are they now? These are great questions that you ask. But I think behind them, the wondering I have is it would just seem from your perspective that literally nothing is improved and everything is getting worse. And we have pretty extensive,
I don't have that perspective.
we have pretty extensive evidence of the reverse. That doesn't mean that as you're rolling out new curriculum, you won't find errors and need to address them and improve them. Do you have internal systems of accountability? Are people held accountable for that performance? Do they improve that? Do you engage with classroom teachers on issues of lesson delivery based upon the feedback that they have? You make improvements so that it will improve the quality of that lesson content for the next year. So these are the things that I can see happening pretty regularly in Houston. Significant and regular upgrades in terms of the quality of supports that students are getting and that teachers receive.
Ultimately, though, I mean, it's the families, it's the parents, I guess, who will tell us how we're doing. And some families are more tuned in than others because they're working several jobs and they can't be as involved as some others can be. But if we look at the family sentiment, I mean, there are clear concerns from many families, specifically Black, white, Asian families, over the direction that the district is taking since the takeover. Enrollment declines are accelerating. Yes, we had many during COVID, and yes, we've been experiencing them for a period of years, but those enrollment declines are accelerating. As you know, NES has higher declines than non-NES. So it's one thing to say, the bad media coverage is scaring people away. Okay, but why are existing parents opting out?
Yeah, I mean, your paper certainly covered all of these issues extensively. I think all of that information is sort of worthy to look on and reflect on and make adjustments, however possible. The charge is to make sure that what we offer across the breadth of all of the HISD schools are the best schools possible to support families. But if families have the priority, they make the decisions that they think are best to support their kids. And I would always want a parent to make a decision that they think is best to support their kids. So what we want to do though is we want to make sure that the school is working to actually deliver good instruction in good content. I would say that that's far easier said than done. This is, you want schools to be environments filled with love and support. But if that's all they are, then what you have is a daycare. Because ultimately you send kids to school to learn. You learn to read, write, do math, learn history, grow in their character. And so we want to make sure that the school is supporting the growth of student expertise, the growth of student knowledge. And this is not easy to do. If you think about the way humans learn, there's a bunch of cognitive science evidence that we have on what is the sort of right structural approach to take a human along a sort of learning continuum. And this starts with what you would call acquisition, sort of fact acquisition. I don't know if you're familiar with something called the curse of knowledge. So that'll be another homework assignment for you after this meeting. But a lot of times we as adults, we make a fallacy in our analysis of how children learn and think that this is what I want to do to engage in this topic. And therefore, that's how students need to engage in the topic. But students are not just small humans. They actually are missing huge amounts of knowledge and skill along the way. And so you have to go in a particular order. So you start with basic fact acquisition. Then after fact acquisition, you get to sort of faster manipulation of facts, which we think of as fluency. So first, can you write a grammatically correct sentence? Second, can you write it faster? Third is generalization. Can you do this in somewhat unfamiliar settings? I want you to write 3 different sentences on 3 different topics. And then fourth is adaptation. Can you take that knowledge and sort of manipulate it in very, very unfamiliar ways? And if you think about the experiences of our families in school, I think about say the Falkenberg kids and the Morath kids, and you get in a lesson on the Alamo. My kids have been to the Alamo. My kids have watched the Davy Crockett movie from, the old Disney movie. My kids have me that talks about a lot of the stuff in Texas history all the time. And so if they get, a 30-minute exposure of this content from their teacher, and then immediately move on to an advanced assignment of, okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to reenact the Alamo, and I want you to do that in ways where you are not just what happens if Santa Anna lost and the siege didn't work, and I want you to sort of reimagine that. Now that is a deeply engaging lesson activity, but if you have not actually gotten some of the initial facts right, if you've not gotten some of the initial sort of background knowledge established, when you jump into that lesson, you're actually left behind in the lesson.
Mhm.
And we see this, I see this in school visits, I see this in the data pretty regularly. You've got campuses inside of Houston ISD where the non-low income students, so the Morath kids, the Falkenberg kids at that campus, have 80, 90% proficiency rates. And inside the same school building, same campus, sometimes same teachers, you have 30% of low-income students demonstrating proficiency. And that is actually a pretty normal consequence of curriculum design that skips fact acquisition and fluency and jumps directly into generalization and imitation.
Yeah, I think everybody read the Knowledge Gap. Good book, covers all of that. But we've got 13,000 kids who have left since this takeover. I mean, I think that's as many as we lost during the pandemic. So people are voting with their feet. That there's a problem there. Do you acknowledge that? We can't lose many more. We're losing money. We're losing trust.
Yeah, I think, again, the most important duty that we have is to make sure that we have offered families the best schools that we can possibly offer them. And that those schools will work and get results for their children. Even in a A-rated school, you have some students having essentially a terrible academic experience. Even in an F-rated school, you have some students that have a phenomenal experience. But when we think about the duty that we have with our public schools is to make sure that the schools are designed to get as good results for the broadest group of the students as possible, knowing that each individual's child is different, each individual's family is different, and the decisions that families make for their own kids, we want them to make.
The frustrating thing, I think, sometimes in education policy, because you guys, it's hard, I get it, and you want so desperately to make strides, but I think there's just this pendulum that goes back and forth, and we either gotta do phonics or we gotta do osmosis, whole language. Nobody's saying that these places should just be daycare and fun for everybody and not rigorous. I don't think anybody wants that. But my concern is that we have to look out for the socio-emotional part of learning. And I don't think you would deny that kindergartners, first graders, I mean, they need space in their brains, wiggle room. They need, how do you expect kids to learn the rigor when they don't have a music teacher, they don't have a counselor, they don't have the magnet program that people used to love? I'm thinking about one particular elementary, and the art teacher's gone. So all there is sitting and looking at these screens. It's not okay. And I wonder,
When is the last time that you were able to do a school visit in an NES campus?
if you can arrange one for me, I'd love that, because I was turned down for it when my editor requested it on my behalf.
Okay.
So
I will arrange that, because I mean I have visited NES campuses, and what you describe is a caricature of what is actually happening. So let's let you see it for yourself.
okay. And then I wonder, well, let me ask you, because we are running out of time. So the news has broken since we've been sitting here, and there has always been talk during this takeover that the ultimate plan for HISD is to charter a bunch of the campuses. And there is a bill 1882 that would help facilitate that. And so an announcement has been made that some high-performing schools are going to be given that option. Do you want to talk about that at all?
And I don't know that I can comment with any specificity on what you're talking about inside of Houston ISD. I can certainly describe how the 1882 policy framework works.
But in HISD, I mean, do you think that is is that your understanding that we're just going to start going the charter route and allow districts to oversee charters kind of as contractors who would
I mean, I think,
oversee a school that like HSPBA or pre-K?
yeah, there have been for probably 20 years in district charters and HISD. This is like not a new thing. So I think you had 20 or 30 of these campuses that were run by third-party contractors. I'm trying to remember some of the names of them, but like this has been an old practice in Houston.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what is with 1882, how do you think that the access would or wouldn't change? I know you care about integration and you know how vital it is in closing the achievement gap. Do you think that the public that we all appreciate about public schools would change under chartering, more chartering?
I'm not sure why that would be true. I mean, the way that the law works is anybody that lives in a geographic area is entitled to enroll inside of that school system, but school systems by law have control over how they assign student enrollment from a policy perspective. So you've got, for example, in Houston ISD, you've got schools that have magnet test-in practices. So not every kid in Houston can attend some of those schools. They have to test in, they got to do certain things to get in there. So that's not necessarily a new thing in Houston either. I'm not sure that I'd know sort of how that would change moving forward.
All right. One thing, very few people I think would disagree with you about the dysfunction of the elected HISD board before. There were open meetings violations. There was childish behavior, people enriching themselves at different points. Not something that any of us want for our children. But we also really appreciated having representatives, taxpayers, everybody wants representation. And so now we have this system where if I'm upset about something, I can go speak for 60 seconds. They cut me off. I go sit down and the board of managers stares at me and doesn't say anything about what I've just said. If you haven't watched the meetings, please do. It's heartbreaking. That is not the way it works at the legislature. You get 5 minutes, city council, you get 2 minutes. So then we had some board members who are actually asking questions. They were a little more outspoken. And, you removed them in June. Can you tell us why you removed them?
Yeah, we made a change given where we had been in the intervention and where we were headed. So if you think about the progress that has been made over the last a couple of years, it was, it's, as you will know, a bumpy ride. We are rapidly shifting back to return of the district to electoral control. And so like any process you go through, sort of reflect on what where we are, what are the dynamics we want to set in place moving forward. So we made an adjustment. I will say I am grateful for all the people who have served on the board of managers. They're just a phenomenal group of human beings, and it's a very difficult job that they have done.
Could you tell us what rapidly means? Takeover's been extended, and just wondering, the announcement's supposed to be made in June 2027. But when do you anticipate that we'll have our full democratic control back?
Yeah, so by the June 2027 date, we'll have to make the final decision to announce and say this is in fact when it's coming. So it is within that time period that the sort of full control process in terms of returning to electoral control will be announced.
Okay, so do you have any anticipation of when the date for full control might be?
Again, it's by June of 2027 is when we'll have to announce, and this will be the process that we follow.
Can you tell us the latest possible date when we'll get our school board back?
Well, I cannot make the announcement past June of 2027. So it's again, by June of 2027, that's when we announce this is when we're returning back to electoral control.
Okay, but you feel, is it your opinion, looking at all of this, that you think HISD, yes, I know how we feel about the test scores, but that the enrollment, the parent sentiment, the teacher turnover, that this takeover as it's going on right now being implemented is sustainable?
The way that the district worked before was essentially every campus for itself. There was not necessarily common systems or processes. School districts, individual campuses had an operating budget. They make decisions. This is why, for example, you would almost every year in Houston, you have one school that sort of ran out of toilet paper. It's not because they didn't have enough money to buy toilet paper. It's just you're in charge of making decisions. Somebody made a decision, didn't buy enough before the end of the school year. So what you now have is a whole set of different business operating procedures to try to provide some modicum of consistent academic experience for kids, so that even in some of the most at-risk communities in Houston, kids are going to be exposed to great literature, rigorous math, and the like. So what we can do is make sure that those business processes are in place. But ultimately, a local board is in charge of the school system. So a local board can go in any direction it wants at any time. My hope is that the academic rigor that's been established in those campuses can be sustained long term.
Somebody says they still don't have toilet paper at some of these campuses, so I don't know if that's the case. One more thing, Jennifer, before she cuts me off, we do want to take some of y'all's questions. There's many more than we can take, but the cost of education is so interesting. I mean, I think we probably agree that up to a certain level, if you fund a school at a certain level, I think it's been shown that above that, you don't see that much difference. But what we've seen is that NES is funded substantially more than other schools. And so then what happens if you have a special focus school that's being asked to do everything that the NES schools are doing, but they're not getting that extra funding? And I'm worried, I'm wondering also, what are the obstacles in making this a replicable model, or even expanding with an HSD, if there's not more money to help pay for this more expensive approach?
Yep. Yeah, the school district's budget at the moment, I think, is ballpark $16,000 a year. There are aspects of the school finance per kid. There are aspects of the school finance system that allow the school district to increase its access to funds for certain sustainable strategies. I'm certain the administrative team is looking at that to try to broaden the resource base that's available within Houston ISD. And then, of course, the decisions to allocate resources within Houston ISD is always a very difficult decision to make, because you want to ensure that you're supporting all kids, but there's certain students that will clearly need more additional resources. And so you can see that in the NES campuses. My assumption is the leadership team there is trying to figure out how to draw down additional funds under the school finance system to support even more campuses, as well as some of the NES campuses have been supported.
Okay. Thank you. Jennifer?
All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. Someone wrote, in your interview with the Houston Chronicle 2 years ago, you spoke about supporting a well-rounded education, including recess twice a day for young students and access to extracurriculars enrichment. Yet under the state's takeover, we've seen the opposite: a narrow focus on test prep, schools eliminating recess for students as young as first grade, and the cancellation of field trips in the name of more instructional time. What specific steps can be taken to restore HISD to the well-rounded vision you described, one that values creativity, enrichment, and the whole child?
Yeah, it is a great question, but I also think if we're going to have a sort of a policy debate about how to make the best school, we want to make sure we have the same fact base. So as my understanding, in the NES model, you have a standardized approach to recess for the youngest kids that is either 1 or 2 times a day, and then the older kids get 1 time a day. So in terms of elimination of recess in first grade, I'm just unaware of that being a truth. Now that may be like recess has changed, it's restructured, it's minutes devoted to it, like that I can believe. And of course there's differences between the schools that have higher degrees of autonomy in Houston and in the NES campuses. But yeah, so you have to have a well-rounded education. You have to have kids that are experiencing, art and music and physical education and unstructured free play time. That's why recess is so important in the research. You want to make sure that you're scheduling field trips and visits. You got kids at NES campuses that are able to go to Washington, D.C. now. They didn't, that wasn't happening before. So so you want to make sure that that those kinds of opportunities are structured and integrated. There's there's approach to field trips, I'm sure, from your own lived experience. You probably participate in some field trips. You're like, I wonder what I was supposed to learn or what that field trip was supposed to accomplish. So you want to be thoughtful about the sort of design of the field trip experience. You think about the museum resources that are available in Houston are so rich, and you can go to a museum and accomplish nothing, or you can go to a museum and sort of tie it into the arc of the unit and sort of the week before and after. So I think these are a lot of things that the district, again, thinks intently about and tries to methodically improve sort of year in and year out.
There were quite a few, more than I expected, quite a few comments related to AI generated instructional material and lessons. And there are some people saying that you're aware of numerous errors in slides, worksheets, and even answer keys. In a space where AI is still unregulated and proven as an effective educational tool, what oversight or quality control measures are in place to ensure accuracy and protect instructional quality for our students?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm not a big fan of AI in education generally, but there different things can have different use cases. The instructional oversight question is the job of the administration and the board to ensure that the resources that they're providing to teachers are the highest quality. They have to have feedback loops. They have to have edit checks when they find errors. They have to have a process to fix those errors and correct those errors. I have seen evidence that is happening. So I'm familiar with both reporting and social media reports the first year of the intervention that would point out this error, this error, this error, and those errors aren't there anymore. So the process for the district to methodically upgrade its curriculum has been pretty intensive, at least from what I've seen.
There were also quite a few comments and questions related to special education and parents with students with IEPs. Some people are saying their, special education complaints facing month-long delays, and this year HISD adopted a new platform that does not give parents access to their child's records as they did under Easy IEP. Is there any, just anything that you'd like to say to address that?
I'm unfamiliar with the IT system change, but clearly parents should have full access to their IEPs. So like that's if that's the case, that's got to get addressed and get addressed quickly. We have a bunch of ways of evaluating the district's special education systems. What we've seen is fairly methodical improvements, but there's still a lot of work that has to be done to ensure that we're serving our students with disabilities as effectively as we should be.
There's also a lot of discussion about customizing, and this is related to books. Should teachers in a city as diverse as Houston, should teachers be able to customize the literature that they read to the interests and cultural background of their students? The literature reference.
That is a super fascinating and great question. And I would love to spend like an hour on just that one question because I think it is great. I don't think there is a one answer to the question. What I will say is educators will sometimes speak of this as sort of like mirrors and windows. You want kids to be able to see a reflection of themselves, but they also need to see the world around them. So there's a literary canon for a reason, and you want kids to engage in the literary canon to have a common body of knowledge. If you happen to make a reference in this conversation to, well, that sounds like a real albatross around your neck, that comes from it. It would be nice if the students had read The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. But you have again a hugely diverse student population. You want to be able to identify yourself in every story. So I think about story time at my house. Lisa, you talked about that earlier, and me reading to my kids. In fact, my oldest, who's a girl, when she was younger, the story of Atalanta. Now, my kid is not Greek, so she ain't gonna identify with that. My kid is also far more modern than the story of Atalanta, but my kid is a girl, and the story of a girl that would race all the boys, and when the boys lost, they would all die. This was a very engaging story for my little girl, and so you want to find stories that can really ignite the passion and curiosity of kids, but you also, again, want to give them access to the common knowledge of educated Americans.
Yes, and if I could just, I think there was even a question, there was a comment saying, I don't know of anyone who thinks of The Princess and the Pea as their favorite story. And so there was a way that these stories, you know, teachers would allow some autonomy. I think it was just a matter of engaging students, which just sounds like is something that you agree with broadly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the process of choosing the literature and choosing the stories that kids read, it is a deeply important process. I think about what my kids can get exposed to that we methodically curate versus what they just stumble across. And some stories have messages that we want to reinforce, and some don't. As parents, and so the question is really what's the process that you have to go through as an organization to choose the literature that your kids are exposed to. And if the process is 10,000 classrooms, every teacher just picks it for themselves, you're going to get a pretty wide dispersion of choices, some of which parents will agree with and love, and some of which people could find significant fault with. So I think the question is what's the process to norm around this is the literature that we're going to teach, and then choose that. You want to involve educators in that. You want to involve curriculum specialists involved in that. You want to involve parents in that for sure to arrive on it. But I don't know that it's a real recipe for success of letting every single person pick anything they want to read every single day. That's also just a lot of weight to put on the shoulders of an individual educator.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Morath and Lisa Falkenberg for today and for everyone tuning in. We have time for just one more question, and this is one that actually came up the most, is in regards to you know, enrollment declines and widespread community dissatisfaction. How does the state monitor or value community engagement and trust when evaluating the success of the intervention, and what accountability exists when those measures trend downward?
Yeah, well, the one thing let's just make sure we're using the sort of an accurate language. I think that there is significant disagreements among groups within the Houston community from the Chronicle's own coverage of the parent satisfaction survey. But the majority of parents actually seem to actually have a positive opinion. So this phrase of widespread dissatisfaction, it's sort of, that's a function of the networks that you're talking to. There's a bunch of different communities in Houston. That being said, we do monitor this. We're interested in making sure that the district is seeing academic progress, that the district is remaining financially efficient and solvent on a long-term basis. And so far, we've seen strong internal financial management practices, and we've seen academic improvements writ large.
Can I ask one more thing, Jennifer?
Go for it. Yeah.
Yes. I guess I wanted to know, what's the quality control on this experiment? You're very invested in it for good reason. You want to see a certain outcome. You want to see a certain change. How do you make sure you don't have confirmation bias? Is there independent review of this? I have trouble finding academics who are actually really tuned in and following it. Minus
Yeah,
those
I mean,
grads.
we have sort of three major sets of objective data that's available to us for every public school in the state of Texas. You have all, and in fact, even beyond that, there's a bunch of different data points. So you could look at attendance rates. There's attendance rates for students, there's attendance rates for staff. So what's the average sort of ADA percentage? So we've seen staff attendance rates increase. We've seen student attendance rates, I think, hold steady, maybe show a slight increase. You can see performance on academic indicators that have reliability. So this is STAR, this is SAT, ACT, AP exams, dual credit course completions, this sort of thing. You can see graduation rates. So those are the third-party sort of reliable sets of information that we have access to, and we can see that they're generally moving in the right direction. There are other indicators that are anecdotal. We can run surveys. We can see survey results and survey data. You can, of course, enrollment is an indication. And so if there's a significant increase in enrollment, you can interpret it one way. We're seeing the reverse in Houston, so it's a and so the question is, when you make that, how do you evaluate that in the context of all of the broader things? But I think, confirmation bias is something that's really important for people in my line of work. It's really important for people in your line of work. So how do we know? How do we seek out countervailing pieces of information? How do we assess the progress? And in a system as large as Houston ISD, there are always going to be some individual challenges. You had, for years, you had schools that were an A one year and then like an F the next year. So what happens in those cases? You would periodically have campuses that were an F one year and an A the next year. What happened in those cases? And so how do you evaluate that and try to make the sort of best holistic judgment of what's going on? Regardless, this intervention was done for a very specific reason. It's a very short change in practice, and then we return it back to elected trustees who will oversee the district at that point in time moving forward.
Well, thank you so much for running this gauntlet, taking all these questions. They weren't easy questions. We appreciate your making yourself available and always being professional and for listening. It's something that's good for a leader to do. So we really appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am. Well, it's great to be with you today.